The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference. I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. We have a friend of the Susan Brender Show here with us today, and he's known as the Motivator. His name is Michael Solomon, and he's a former NYPD Special Investigator and best-selling author. He's the survivor of a double murder attempt on his life. During his tenure in the Intelligence Division, he was assigned to protect the Shah of Iran and Madam Chang of Taiwan. He has personally met 4 presidents, and that is really something else. Michael was assigned as the intelligence officer in the U.S. Department, where he participated in treaty negotiations between the United States and Turkey, and I want to welcome him again to the Susan Brender Show. Thank you, Motivator. Come on, and let's have a great talk.
Thank you, Susan. It's always good to be with you. I'm glad I'm back.
Okay. You know, Michael, it's very interesting times that we're dealing with, and I really think that you have a lot to talk about, because during these times, everybody is absolutely going crazy. And with regard to that, there are things that are going on that people won't even believe. But you know, and I want to ask you, I know that you've been involved in the past with investigating voter fraud. Can you tell our listeners what you discovered?
Well, it goes back to 2008 when we started it. I knew things were getting a little kinky back then during the presidential election. So we started a website, and we got a lot of people involved, called acornwatch.org, which had to do with which was an offshoot of the of Acorn group. We just named it after them because they were involved in so much fraud. It was amazing. And then they were out there doing major registrations for the Democratic Party and putting things together. And what we found right here in Palm Beach County alone was that over 6,200 people, this is only one county, Palm Beach County, 6,200 people, 87% registered Democrats, 13% Republicans, voted twice. And they didn't vote here twice. What they did was these were people who were basically snowbirds who came down from Chicago, Boston, New York, Pennsylvania for winter residence. And they either voted by absentee ballot in New York or Chicago or Massachusetts, whatever, and then came down here and voted in person, or vice versa, voted through the mail down here and then up there. We had presented the proof to the supervisor of election, who claimed she couldn't do anything because she doesn't have police powers and other powers, but she could have turned it over to the state district attorney's office or state attorney's office when she didn't. So that those votes actually got counted twice. If you look at some of the websites that you see, some of the people who were indicted, and over the course of the country, that for election fraud, it's amazing what some of these people have been indicted for. For example, in Florida, there's been so many people who were indicted for fraudulent abuse of absentee ballots. There was one woman in 2017, Gladys Coelho, who was indicted and criminally convicted of altering the vote count. She worked for the elections department. Anthony Grant in 2017 also convicted of fraudulent use of absentee ballots. They sent in absentee ballots and didn't try to vote in person. So that's what happens. People ineligible
Michael,
to vote and such.
Excuse me for interrupting you. One of the things that's been really in the news for quite some time now is about the postal office and the fact that we don't know, what's going into the postal office and what's going out.
Well, let me explain how that works. That's one of the ways that voter fraud can be conducted. here's the problem with mail-in ballots. There are two types of mail-in ballots, and people don't realize this. There's an absentee ballot, which you can get if you're ill or sick and you can't get to the voting place, or if you're going to be out of town, or it's similar to military ballots if you're in the service and you're not home. You can, by mail, you can request an absentee ballot. They will send it to you. Now, that ballot is yours. It's nobody else's. It's yours. And it's proven that it's your ballot. Your name is on it. Your signature's got to be on it. It's barcoded, and they know when it's been sent back. Once you mail in an absentee ballot and it's counted, or it's in the election office, you can't go vote in person. Otherwise, you're voting twice. You can't do that. It's in the rolls, and it says right in there in the rolls that you received an absentee ballot and it was returned. Period. That's it. Now, that's an absentee ballot, and that's perfectly problem-free. There's very, very, very little fraud involved in that, unless, again, you try to vote in person after sending in an absentee ballot. The other type of mail-in ballots is indiscriminate mail-in ballots, where they indiscriminately mail them out, and that to me is absolutely ridiculous. So what they do, and I'm going to give you an example of what happened to me personally because I tried something.
Okay.
They actually go on the voter rolls and they indiscriminately mail out ballots to you because you're registered to vote. Whether or not you want one or whether or not you have any intentions of voting this year, you're going to get a ballot mailed to you. Now, here's the problem with that. Two things. Number one, it goes out indiscriminately, so people just know that they're going to be mailed on such and such a date. The ballots go out there. There's nothing preventing somebody from walking up and down the street, pulling them out of your mailbox, actually stealing your mail, stealing the ballots, and sending them in any way they want. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing can stop that. It can happen, and it's happened. There was a report in the New York Post this week that it's happened in New Jersey. They actually changed an election, the outcome of an election by fraud. So that's the problem, total indiscriminate ballots. The other thing, too, is even if you get those ballots and you mail them back, people are going to be getting ballots who are no longer living at an address. If you moved within the last year or the last 2 years and you never notified your election office here, supervisor of election, they're not going to know it. If you moved from New York to Florida, you moved out of town completely, I will guarantee you're still registered in New York. Because unless you physically notify the election office in New York where you lived, in your county, your election district, you're going to be on that election roll. You're going to be on that registration roll. You can go back there. I guarantee you can go back there and vote, and they'll never know you moved. They'll never know. They never compare one to the other. That's the biggest problem. The other thing is that on the ballot itself, there is an envelope that the ballot goes into. On the back of that envelope, you have to sign it, and underneath that box where you sign it, there is a barcode. And under the barcode, there is the numbers. There's a serial number. In that serial number is one of three letters, and a D for Democrat, an R for Republican, or an N for Independent, no party affiliation. There's nothing stopping anybody, even if they mail it back legally and legitimately, who grabs that envelope. It could be a postman who says, "Oh my God, this is a Democratic vote, or this is a Republican vote, and I'm the opposite party. This is going in the garbage," because they feel that you're not going to vote for their candidate. It's a lot different when you get an absentee ballot and they know it's directly going to you, and you got to sign for it, and that, and you have to sign it, and they compare the signatures, so they know you're requesting it. It's not like it's just sent out indiscriminately. Now, here's one of the problems. Okay, my dad lived up in Daytona. I called the county election office up there. And I told him I was him. I just said I live in such and such a street, and I haven't voted up there in about the last 8 years, because I moved up to New York for a while, and now I'm back, and I'm back in living in Boca Raton. Am I still registered to vote? They looked it up. I gave him his Social Security number, and I gave him his date of birth, and they said, "Sure, you can vote." And I said, "Well, can I get an absentee ballot? I'm living in Boca Raton." and I'm not going to drive all the way up there just to vote. And they said, no problem. What's the address? My dad died in 2002, rest his soul. So
my goodness.
That's 18 years ago, and he's still on the rolls. He's registered to vote.
Right.
And they were going to send me an absentee ballot. And I said to them that don't send it yet. Let me call you back in a few days. I want it, but it was ready to go. Now I didn't want to get it. I didn't want the ballot down here because first of all, I wouldn't use it. But if I did use it, it would be a felony, and I could have been arrested. Yeah. But it's absolutely ridiculous.
Michael, one of the interesting points is that Trump is against, or actually for, getting rid of these ballots, but the
he doesn't want to get rid of them. Here's the problem with the post office. First of all, this whole thing about funding the post office is a joke. The post office has $14 billion in excess right now. They've got enough money to run the post office till the middle of 2021, long way past the election, at least 6 to 8 months past the election before the new budget comes out. So there's no problem with the money. The problem is the states. The states want to send out all these mail-in ballots within a week of the election. It's a joke. So it's going to take 2 or 3 days for them to get there. They're going to sit in people's mailboxes or in their house for 2 or 3 days before they mail them back. And the post office says there is no way that we can get them back to the elections office in time. So they're saying, they're coming out with this whole thing that the president wants to stop the mail-in ballots by stopping it in the post office. No, the post office has nothing to do with the fact that they're sending them out. It's the states sending them out late. It's not sending a birthday card out the day after somebody's birthday. It's fine, but unless it's a belated birthday card, it's not going to happen. And there are no belated ballots. You can't send in a ballot that gets back to any election office after midnight on election day and expect it to be counted. It's not going to happen. Wow. It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Well, all right. That leads me to asking, if you know, and it sounds like you know, what do you do about this situation preventing voter fraud? Because needless to say, a lot of people are speaking out, but nothing is being done. But you must have a handle on that. So I'd like to know what you would do. I mean, solutions are very much a part of what is so necessary to discuss. Michael, I'll tell you something. There's been so many things going on, as I had indicated before, but solutions are part of what is so important for audiences to know. Because if you don't have a solution, I mean, you can talk all about how bad it is, that it's not working, things are not going your way, or that sort of thing, but you need a solution. So I want to know what your solution is to this issue with voter fraud.
Well, one of the solutions is if you catch somebody, you prosecute them to the full extent of the law, and you publicize it. You let the world know. It'll stop. Believe me. Let's take, for example, look what happened recently with Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman spending when they bribed college admissions offices in scandals.
Yes.
Do you believe that their spending time in jail is going to make people think twice before trying to bribe a college official? You bet that is. I mean, that's what's going to happen. That is exactly what's going to happen. Now, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on, especially here in Florida, in Palm Beach County. In a recent discussion I had with the supervisor of elections, Wendy Satori-Link, who's a magnificent lady, and she's doing a hell of a job, she said to me that if any credible evidence of election fraud is brought to her attention, she will refer it to the state attorney's office or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for prosecution and back it up 100%. There's a computer database. This is something that's interesting, and I didn't know this till this year. Computer database known as ERIC. Individual states must join the program, and it lets other states and counties know that where a person has voted. So, and it notifies them in less than 4 seconds. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
You go in to vote in Florida, and if you belong to ERIC, to this database, as soon as you're ready to vote, as soon as you sign in, within seconds, they know if you voted in New York, in Chicago, or whatever. And they'll say, I'm sorry, but you already voted, especially in a national election. That's what will happen. By the way, just as an aside, one of the people who we found out fraudulently voted in 2008 was a U.S. congressman who was not living in Florida but representing Florida District 22, and he moved. He moved right after he was elected to the first term. He's been there 13 years to Maryland. He was mailing. He voted from Maryland by mail and also voted in Maryland. He was homesteaded in Maryland and using an illegal address in Florida, which was his in-laws in an adult gated community. He's no longer in Congress, by the way. He's gone since then. He was also Barack Obama's state representative in Florida, but he didn't even live here. That's how far it went. It went right all the way up to the halls of Congress. It's crazy, but that's what happened. But this database, which is known, as I said, is known as ERIC. Individual states must join the program. Okay? Right now, across the country, there are 30 states. There are 30 states that are members of ERIC, and they are locked into that computer database so they can tell if people have voted in other states. New York is not one of those 30. They're not. They have no intentions of joining it. And there is more problems in New York and New Jersey right now with voter fraud. I mean, they have an election right now where they have 28% of the ballots in a primary election in New York for Congress were thrown out as being insufficient or bad ballots. In New Jersey and Princeton, I'm not sure if it was Princeton, but right now there's an election it's been about 6 or 8 weeks, and they still haven't got results because of fraud in the elections and ineligible ballots. That's what happens when you vote by mail. People don't know. They send out a ballot, and how long do you wait for it to come back? Days, weeks, hours, months? It just can't happen.
Yeah, that brings up the point about different presidents. You can hear things like this when Obama was running for president, nor Clinton, and even the Bushes. You never heard about this.
Oh, yes, you did, but nobody paid attention to it because the media wouldn't publish it. Let me take an example of what happened in 2000 with the hanging chads down here. Okay, the lawsuit, part of the lawsuit that wound up in the Supreme Court by Al Gore had to do with the military ballots. They didn't want to count them. Why didn't they want to count them? Because most military guys in the military are Republicans. It's just for some reason they're Republicans. But anyway, here's what their ruling was. They went to court and said we won't count those ballots because there's no postmark on them. We don't know when they were received or when they were mailed. Wow. Well, guess what? Military mail never has a postmark on it. It's called APO. Army Postal Office, and it just gets sent back, and they don't run them through the post office. They just deliver them. So they wanted to throw them out, and then part of the decision by the Supreme Court was that the military ballots have to be counted, and it was at that point that Gore gave up, and he lost the election. 6 months later, 2 newspapers, I believe it was the Miami Herald and I think USA Today, spent about $60,000 doing a recount on the election, and they found out that Bush actually won Florida by a couple of points. Wow. And that, but that's not publicized anyways. I mean, you wouldn't see that in the mainstream media, but that's a fact. People can look that up online. They spent anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000. I don't remember exactly how much they spent doing a recount.
Michael, the interesting thing is that when I talk to different people about this president, and I'm talking about Trump, obviously, I've found out that there is such hatred toward this man that no matter whatever he says or whatever he does, they hate him. They just hate him, and they don't really listen to what he says because he's not a good public speaker. Now, what do you think about that? I mean, where does this hatred come from?
One word, Susan, jealousy. I think we've spoken about this before.
Yes.
Jealousy is the biggest instigator of hatred and that you can put out there. When people are actually jealous of something that somebody does, that was it. So from the minute he got elected, I mean, you remember they had this man dead in the water. They said one poll last year on it, I don't know which, I think it was CNN, said that he's going to lose 100 to 1. That he's going to, if he wins 5 states, it'll be a lot. Well, surprise, surprise. And I mean, it's known that the night of the election results came out, Hillary actually threw a beer bottle into a television screen. I mean, she didn't come out of bed for 2 days I mean, this is, that's the way it was. That's the problem. And if the fake news today, if it's absolutely unbelievable. Here's the question: if it wasn't for Twitter, and he wasn't getting on Twitter every other day, and what would the news have to say? But they picked this fight. They started this fight even before the election in 2016. Yeah. And it went crazy. I asked somebody the other day. I wrote an op-ed on something. A basic question, which turned out it was on Facebook and Twitter. And these people, they hate him, and he did this and he did that. And I said, give me one reason. Give me one reason you personally hate him. And I said to you, name one thing that happened to you, a family member or a friend or somebody you know, on one of his, whatever he's done, that has hurt them personally, financially, or any other way, except for COVID. I mean, that's hurting everybody. That's totally out of control. But name one thing that he's done that has hurt you, financially, emotionally, or in the pocketbook. I didn't get an answer yet. It's been days. I haven't gotten an answer because there is nothing. Sure. What has he done? No. And imagine if we didn't have Twitter and everything else, and I mean, the mainstream media is not going to tell you the great things he did. They're still saying that the economy was lousy and Obama had a better economy. Wait a minute. When Obama left office, unemployment was over 8.5%, 9%.
That's right.
It was down to 3.5% just before COVID. And when he tried to stop COVID, we had no cases in the United States. There was one case, I believe, in Seattle, somebody who came over from China with it, and he shut down the borders. What's the first thing they screamed? He's xenophobe. He's racist. There's no reason to shut the borders down. And Fauci himself said, not saying, we got to look at the science. Well, the science is very simple because Fauci back in January said, this is nothing more than another case of the flu. And I'm listening to Biden saying, we stopped the pandemic in 2019. Really? Well, in 2012, we had the H1N1 flu. There was 67 million Americans infected and 61,000 people died from the flu. From the flu,
that's right. Now, let's get your thoughts.
And they never declared an emergency or anything.
I hear you, but, what's going on today is really horrible. I mean, people just don't know. They don't understand what is going to happen. And as a result of that, they're kind of hesitating to really get involved in politics because they know that a lot of this issue with the COVID is actually a political thing.
It is a political thing. You're going to watch what happens on November 4th. If Biden wins, COVID's going to disappear.
I hear you, and I kind of agree with you.
And I've spoken to people I know in the medical field, and here's the problem, and here's where the politics comes into it. We're doing more testing than ever before. We're doing more testing than any other country in the world. When you get a positive test, that doesn't mean there's a virus out there. It just means that somebody's positive.
Right.
Right. So when you get 10,000 positive tests in the state of Florida, or 50,000 in the United States, doesn't mean there's 50,000 cases of COVID out there. It means there are 50,000 people that tested positive. They're not sick. They have no symptoms. And 96% of the people that have died from underlying conditions. Yes, they might have been exacerbated by COVID. If you have COPD or you've got tuberculosis and you wind up getting pneumonia because of COVID, okay, yes, it's probably going to exacerbate your underlying illness and you might die from the underlying illness, but you didn't die from COVID. COVID itself isn't killing people. Very few people have died from COVID itself. Last year in Florida alone, 6,000 people died from the flu in 2019.
That's right.
During the first flu season.
Well, it's very difficult
with underlying conditions.
People. Yeah.
I mean, the last thing I'd want if I had, God forbid, I had a lung disease or something, would I want to get the flu, or even a bad cold or a sore throat can kill you?
Certainly not. Yeah. Now, that leads me to asking you about the campaign as of now and your thoughts about it, because nobody knows. And it's so weird, whatever's going on. And Trump is, as we talked before, unfortunately, there's a segment of our society who say, oh, my God, this guy is inarticulate. He sounds like an idiot. He does Twitter. And what president does Twitter? But I'm sure
the news isn't going to. The news isn't going to. The mainstream media is certainly not going to scream his praises out there and what he's done. He's articulate. Believe me, he's articulate. I look at it this way, Susan. Let me give you a metaphor. You're in a hospital. Okay. You're in a hospital, and you're lying in bed, and you have a terminal disease. You've got a week to live. 2 doctors walk in your room, and you have a choice of which doctor you're going to use to treat you. The first doctor's got a horrible bedside manner. He's crass, right? He maybe looks stupid, and his hair is disheveled, and he's not the kind of guy you want to have dinner with. The other doctor walks up to you and says, but he says to you, his last words to you is, "I'm going to fix you, and I can cure you, and I've got the cure, and I'll have you out of here on your feet in a week." And the other guy walks in there. He's got a nice look. He's dressed to the nines. He's got a great bedside manner. He talks sweet. He's got a great vocabulary. And he says, well, I might be able to help you. Who are you going to choose?
Well, it's obvious, obviously.
It's obviously the guy who said, I can fix you, and he's got a track record in doing it.
Yeah. There's no question
they talk about he went bankrupt. He bankrupted his casino in Atlantic City. Oh, wait a minute. There were 12 casinos in Atlantic City. 11 of them went bankrupt. Why did they go bankrupt? They went bankrupt because nobody was going there. You need customers if you run a business. The city of Atlantic City went into bankruptcy themselves because they frauded everybody. The casinos were kicking back. I don't know what the percentages were. It wasn't a kickback, but they were giving the city of Atlantic City money to build a buffer between the main street outside the casinos and 2 blocks over. They were supposed to tear down all those row houses, and they were supposed to build a park as a buffer zone to keep the riffraff out of the casinos. They absconded with the money, ran off. There was all kinds of fraud. The state actually put the city of Atlantic City into receivership and took over.
Yeah.
And people didn't want to go there. They were getting mugged in the street. There were hookers and vagrants all over the streets outside the casinos, and people didn't want to go there. They didn't want to be confronted with this, so they stopped going. So if you don't have customers, you don't make money, and you say, well, it's time to close my doors. He wasn't the only one. 12 casinos, 11 of them went under.
Michael. Yeah, I really understand what you're saying, but I'll tell you straight out that this subject that we're talking about, voter fraud, has a lot of relevance to what's going on today, and it's going to make a big difference in the election. And I think that, as you said before, wait till after the election, and you're going to see things very differently. Now, my guest today has been the Motivator, Michael Solomon. And Michael, tell the audience how they can get your books, how they can get in touch with you, and all the other things you want them to know.
Well, they can go to my website, michaelsolomonbooks.com, or my books are actually on Amazon.com. It's Success by Default, The Conversion Prophecy, which is my last book, and Where Did My America Go, which is an expose on politics and how it's changed over the last 100 years in America. It's actually the book that started the Tea Party movement, and that was back in 2006 is when that book was written. And I've got one more, hopefully it'll be out soon, another novel, which should be out in a couple of months. And we're working on 2 more, so I'm kind of busy. My fingers are starting to get calloused, but we're doing that, and it's and that's what's going on. Basically, that's it. And my concern is that you said something about we can see what's going to happen with this election. It's for a lot of fraud and everything else. I've got to tell you, Susan, I think there's a silent majority out there that nobody has seen. And they're basically Trump supporters. And I know people who have said to me that if I got to walk barefoot over broken glass, I'm going to the polls and voting.
And I've heard the same thing, interestingly enough. Well, thank you very much for being on the Susan Brender
My
Show.
pleasure.
It's been a pleasure again, and thank you again for being such a great guest.
We try. Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure.